Hello and welcome. I'm David Hearst and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague Peter Oborne. 2 weeks ago, Andy Burnham walked into Downing Street. Last Thursday, up to 50,000 people swam and walked into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. And the days in between, Donald Trump announced the disarmament of Hamas, the annihilation of Iran, and then negotiations with Iran, while Israel found out that its own strike had been cancelled in the middle of reading his social media. 4 stories and one question running underneath all of them. Who is actually deciding any of this? Because look at what each of them have in common. 50,000 people crossed into Ceuta in a single day, and a border doesn't open like that without a decision being made on the Moroccan side. And yet the response of 22 nations of Europe was to turn on Spain. 22 governments signed a letter against Madrid. Only France and Portugal refused to sign it. Some of the 22 went further and demanded Spain's expulsion from the Schengen agreement altogether. And then on Monday, the Commission reaffirmed Morocco as an important strategic partner and offered it more money for border management. How odd. Britain's new Prime Minister, meanwhile, stood in Dover and promised to be relentless about the boats. But the falling crossings he is claiming credit for happened right across Europe. And the part he controls depends on a French agreement, and the French may walk away from it in October. In Gaza, Hamas put its name to a document promising a phased Israeli withdrawal alongside disarmament. Netanyahu said the document did not reflect Israel's positions, and yesterday, after a meeting in Jerusalem, the Board of Peace announced that there would now be no withdrawal at all until disarmament is complete. Light weapons, heavy weapons, and the tunnels. Hamas is still asking the mediators what it signed. And in Iran, 6 months into the war that killed the supreme leader, the only negotiation anyone can verify is between Tehran and Oman, and it's about shipping lanes. Peter, you've spent a career watching how these decisions actually get made. Let's start in Ceuta. This is an extraordinary story. You've got suddenly Spain, the Spanish enclave of Ceuta, being overwhelmed by up to 60,000 people. 57 of them drown. And instead of sympathy for what can only be regarded as a catastrophe, what you get is 22 European governments blaming Spain and demanding that they have a high-level emergency meeting about common border control. What's going on?
Yes, in a sensible Europe, you would have had a joint statement, first of all, expressing sympathy to the families and the dead in this episode. The second, I think, support for Spain, which seems to have handled the whole thing extraordinarily well, from not having gone there, but they received the refugees and then they sent them back again. It seems quite cleanly, but instead of which you've got this panic, and what you're seeing here, I think, is a phenomenon which is become defining in terms of the European Union as well as Britain, which is concern about domestic, the far right in all their domestic political environments. And so rather than respond in a statesmanlike and sensible way, they responded in a rabid way in order to appease the far right. And you can see that in Britain, where we are, the way it's been misreported and used by Farage of Reform and so on.
And there's also something very odd going on because, as we all know, nothing happens in Morocco without state control.
Of course.
So how is it that the Moroccan police and the border guards suddenly allowed all the Moroccans through? However, they turned back anyone who was African. They didn't get through, according to the New York Times. And then suddenly we have a new and more lucrative agreement between von Leyen, the European, the head of Europe, and the Moroccans about a new trusted status for Morocco. Was Morocco turning on and off the tap to secure a better financial deal from Europe itself?
It reminds me very much of what Turkey was doing, Erdogan, 10 years ago. He's probably still doing it, actually, using the people who are desperate to get to Europe as a negotiating tactic with the European Union. And I would assume that's precisely what Morocco is doing. And you've got to feel sympathy with all concerned, right? So we have the stream of refugees coming up from Africa through the Sahara, these incredible journeys. Let's pause a moment and remember that very moving moment in the World Cup when the Spanish player, whose mum, aged 16, had made that journey, gone through Ceuta, I think, and actually survived. Just to survive is big enough. And the first thing he does, and I was in tears watching it, I'm sure everybody was actually, he takes his medal off, goes to his mum and puts the medal on her. So that is the human story there. Now, Morocco has like Tunisia, like Libya, they all have a series of deals with the European Union, brokered by the intelligence services, where they try and cut off the refugees, the immigrants, the people wanting a better life coming up from Mali or wherever. And they're putting. I've been to visit them actually in Libya. I did 10 years ago. It was harrowing. I mean, they lived in sort of tin cans in the height of the summer. Maybe 100 of them in what effectively with about two meters of space. And they've been captured by local militias, handed over to some form of security organization, and just stuffed in there until they're sent home. Now a lot of them get killed. A lot of the women will be trafficked and blackmailed in the hands of gangs. That is the story. And and of course they want to go to Europe because it's a better life, or they're fleeing wars, civil wars, many of which, of course, have been created by the West, and that is what is happening. And I thought that
there's a reason for that, though, specifically for Spain, because it made two decisions that encouraged it, quite apart from what the Moroccans did or did not do to let them through. Firstly, there was the decision of the Spanish Supreme Court last month that ruled that migrants arriving on Spanish territory by sea could not immediately be deported. And critics say that was one pull factor. But the other one that angered many EU countries, it wouldn't have done 10 years ago, but it does now, is announcing a program to regularize the immigration status of 500,000 migrants. Now 1 million have applied for them. Now, I think these are, both of them, progressive, sensible measures, absolutely in the spirit of Europe. But it shows you just how much Europe has changed, hasn't it? It's no longer this sort of cuddly place. I mean, the narrative about Europe is that we left it and in Brexit, and we became the nasty place, and Europe continued as this nice cuddly place. But doesn't this tell you something about how Europe has changed, and particularly how Italy and Denmark and Spain? I mean, one irony of the whole thing is that Italy has let in far more illegal migrants than Spain has. I think the figures are something like 14,000 to 11,000. And the other one who objected so much was a Danish prime minister who received all this European solidarity when Trump was threatening to eat up Greenland. So so on the one hand you have solidarity when you have national interest, when it's in your national interest, but on the other hand it just doesn't go the other way, does it? And I think it tells you something about how national sovereignty and the whole nationalist trend has eaten away the values of Europe.
It's a very strong point. Of course, you would add another element to this. I've read that, in the United States, the MAGA right are inflaming this sense, across Europe and in Britain, of course, and so you're getting there is a sense that it's hard to judge that this is being politically engineered as a crisis for Europe. I've also read, but I haven't seen it, that the same is coming from Russian, sort of loosely Russian or bots and so on. So there is an attempt to destabilize Europe coming from outside, particularly the United States, I think.
Yes, I think there was there was quite a lot on the official channels of JD Vance, for instance, because it really does suit his to his narrative. But it also shows you how difficult it is to run your own show in Europe when you have so much interference from abroad.
Of course, and
outside Europe anyway.
Well, no, and also you've got insurgent far-right parties, which you're going to have to handle, as which may win the next election, as in France, you've got AFD, they've got the alternative. Now, Pedro Sanchez, who is emerging more and more as a political hero, I think, is trying to stand up.
But he's hated in Europe for exactly that reason.
For that, and so as you say, there is a sense, isn't there, that Pedro Sanchez is standing up for European values, and the others have chosen one reason or another to abandon them. Yeah.
And he's going to find it very hard to keep on doing that. I mean, what Italy has done, Italy can't suspend Schengen as it said it was going to do. What it can do is start a month of special measures, cross-border checks at airports. But that matters in a sense simply because of the air traffic. The Italy-Spain is the world's 7th busiest international air route, some 2.86 million seats in July, 92,000 people a day across between the two.
Well, Meloni is obviously a talented politician, you can tell that. And she can change turn on a sixpence all the time. My guess is that if she tries to make it complicated to fly from Italy to Spain, there will be a national sort of uprising against that. People will be furious at being stuck in airports, courtesy of some political piece of theatre by the Italian leader.
Which brings us quite seamlessly to the subject of reform. Our own party of nationalists, who seem to be going up and now down. It's lost its polls lead for the first time in over a year. Labour is standing at 25.9, Reform at 23.7, the Conservatives on 19.9. Reform stood at 30.4% last year, and it's fallen 6.7 points. I mean, these are small differences, but is something going on?
Well, I don't think that's small. I mean, Labour has come up from something like 20% in the polls to leading in the polls.
Yeah, but the Burnham bounce is less than the Brown bounce.
Well, even so, that may change, but I think Burnham has... The reason for welcoming Burnham rather than Starmer is that you saw one that hoped and felt that Burnham was going to be somebody who could take on reform, whereas Starmer was pathetic. He couldn't do that. He just copied reform, and he didn't have the right... In fact, he just used the language of reform, a nation of strangers, sabotaging his own MPs who stood up against racism and so on. And so Burnham, in that way, I think has been really encouraging. And now the question is, of course, how much of this is down to Mr. Burnham. Mr. Burnham really reminds me of Harold Wilson, a sort of northern-based prime minister. Harold Wilson represented Huddersfield, state-educated. Harold Wilson was. He's a real, genuine background. He was always watching the local football team up there, and there was no pretense about being anybody else, as there was with Blair and very much with Starmer. And I think, therefore, he has the personality to go and confront reform, not by copying their policies, but by remorse, with integrity, saying why that reform is wrong, and thereby winning back those Labour voters who went off to reform what the wretched Morgan McSweeney, the analyst, the strategic advisor to Starmer, called the hero voters. Yeah,
but what's happening in reform itself? I mean, that's obviously, there is a Burnham factor, but is there something eating away inside reform? Is that why we're hearing now, for instance, of a clash of personalities inside reform? Why is Robert Jenrick, for instance, being regarded as a sort of conservative Trojan horse who is waiting for Farage's demise and then possibly could do a post-election pact with the Tory party under his control? What are the suspicions? Because he was when he was brought in, he was a heavyweight from the Tory party, and this was to give Farage heft. But it's not working out in his favour at the moment. What's going on inside Reform?
You have to understand about Reform that it isn't really a political party in the way that most of us understand political parties with mass membership. It certainly started out simply as a bank account. I mean, it's a corporate, it's a company. And it's the representative, the CEO, as it were.
With some very dodgy money in it.
We'll start with Mr. Farage. Is their one asset, and they're owned by international money or just financiers of whom little is known. Hence, therefore, the fact that Mr. Farage failed to declare this mysterious £5 million loan from a crypto financier, and more details are emerging about his deputy, somebody called Tice, and it is odd that such a
right at this minute, both Farage and Tice are under investigation for not declaring interest. One is the £5 million loan. Gift, grant, whatever it is. The other Tice is about Israel and failing to declare an interest in Israel before the debate on Israeli influence on British democracy. So you've got the leader and the deputy leader both under investigation.
And of course, supposing we're speaking before the by-election at the moment, supposing that Farage wins his by-election, which he set in motion, the investigation will carry on. Let's remember that Boris Johnson was subject to a similar investigation, and if it goes badly for him, he may find it hard to survive as an MP. Now, there is a fascinating question at the heart of all of this. Supposing that we learnt tomorrow morning in the exclusive in the Times newspaper that Burnham has accepted a £5 million donation from a mystery financier and not declared it. He would go at once as Prime Minister. It wouldn't be accepted. Whereas Farage, who is a favourite to succeed him as Prime Minister, this information comes public and really it hardly affects him. So there's one rule for serious mainstream politicians like Burnham, or even the same would apply to Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives. And there's another rule for these so-called insurgent politicians, that they can actually be as suspicious as you like, and yet somehow they can be unharmed. And of course, this is something which has come to us courtesy of the United States, where Trump, is a convicted felon with a list of crimes as long as you like. But it doesn't matter because he's an anti-establishment figure. And the question is Britain going to copy the United States? Are we going to allow somebody who is as irregular, I'm being quite careful in my language at the moment, as Farage, or are we going to say we don't want somebody like this in our politics? And at the moment, I mean, I want to say this. Up to now, up to very recently, the mainstream papers, the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, even the Times, have been giving Farage, until very recently, an incredibly easy time. It took, I like to pay tribute to her, somebody called Anna Isaac. She's the city editor of The Guardian. She is the one who set this ball rolling by exposing the $5 million loan. And now she's outside the political kind of system, the lobby and so on, which basically courts has for a very long time courted Farage. Is this going to be a change moment or not? My view is it is. I don't think it's possible for somebody with Farage's record
until recently he's been lying low, hasn't he? Because he had this disastrous set of interviews and it all became a car crash. And so then he and I think he's now in America, getting a sort of refueling from MAGA, sort of EV refueling from MAGA. But and then he's come out with a blizzard of they've come out with a blizzard of announcements about using
Saving
the
our
Navy
country. Yes.
to repulse. There's a problem using the Navy because to repulse the boats, because you'd need the agreement of France to do that, and you don't have the agreement of France anyway. But it's weird, isn't it? Firstly, he has his blizzard of announcements, then he retreats, then there's another series of announcements. You don't really think that his heart is in this, do you?
Well, I think you do. He's studying this by-election. He's every intention is that he's going on. He's fighting, and he remains remarkably popular. His polling has fallen, but he still has a solid base and allies who sing his tune for him. The Mail, the Telegraph, the mainstream media absolutely are doing that. And so his calculation is this will be forgotten. It won't matter. I think in this case he may be wrong.
But he's also got a competitor in Rupert Lowe.
And Rupert Lowe is interesting.
Restore, yeah.
Restore, which is probably right to say, this is even more right wing than Farage. It's deportation of legally people who are here legally. It's hideous politics. It's more right wing than Enoch Powell, for instance, in terms of policy for certain. Islamophobic agenda is absolutely monstrous. Now, Rupert Lowe is a protege of Elon Musk, and so it's just like Farage. It's coming from across the Atlantic. And what we're seeing is the radicalization of British politics and British voters by the creatures of the MAGA far right, which is a nightmare. I mean, it's nothing in common with the British tradition of courteous, decent politics. And the latest word we're getting is there may be some form of coalition between Restore and Reform. But there is a happier thought that maybe they'll just cut each other's throats.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is probably more likely. I mean, the interesting thing about British politics is for years and decades, we got used to the idea of the loyal voter. And partly basically because of the horrible example, I know you'll disagree with me about this, that Maggie Thatcher set in terms of leadership. And the horrible example was followed by Blair and by Starmer, not necessarily by the right, of having a leader that goes out of his way to be unpopular. Right? So you have these mass demonstrations against Iraq, but that doesn't really impinge at all with the decision of Blair to invade Iraq. So Blair somehow gets his political cojones, if you like, by defying public opinion. Starmer did the same thing. So in a sense, you've got leaders who go out of their way to be unpopular. Starmer went out of his way to be unpopular, and they purposely lose vast sections of the electorate. Now, Starmer felt absolutely no qualms about losing the Muslim vote in the Labour Party. But as a result, what you've got is a whole bunch of electors and voters waiting for a leader to emerge. And that creates an incredibly volatile atmosphere. So when, for instance, when your party got going before a horrible internal dispute about leadership, they had 800,000 members. That then disappeared to 80,000 members. So you have this sort of this huge on the left and the right, this huge body of unassigned groups of voters, and that makes politics uniquely volatile, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'd add one other thing there. I think that particularly Labour under Blair, they just took for granted their working class base. They regarded them.
But they didn't just take it for granted. They trashed it.
Well, they did.
They were specifically anti-union.
Yes, exactly.
And they thought that was being clever.
And they did the same, oddly enough, to Muslim voters in the northern seats. They did sort of squalid deals with the elders, and this kind of and the British politics was captured by the pollsters who, identified swing voters, and it became a very technical business. Well, how are we going to...
But do you agree with me that the idea of a loyal voter has disappeared or is disappearing?
Well, I think it's unfortunately re-emerging in many ways.
Okay.
I in the sense that people believe Farage. There is now a block of maybe 20 to 25%.
Perhaps I'm talking more about the left than the right. Because you see these swings going from one party to the other, and then they very quickly disappear.
You are right that of course that we are. It is volatile, but it is interesting that there are still now. It's absolutely coherent. It appears 20-odd% who will vote for Farage. All this,
but doesn't a lot of what aren't ex-miners voting for Farage?
I'm afraid. It looks like it. I mean, not ex-miners. I don't think but the grandchildren of ex-miners. They probably are doing that because they are being brought up in these northern seats with no hope, no job, betrayed by the establishment. In their cases, of course, by generations of Labour MPs, and they may well be switching to the far right. And remember, this is something which happened in France. The collapse of the Communist Party of Marche led to the rise, I think.
Of Le Pen,
yes.
Yeah, I was there at the time. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly in the south. This brings us seamlessly on to Burnham himself. Is Burnham the guy that can right the wrongs of exactly what we're talking about now? Is he big enough? Is he important enough? Does he have the energy to become a real political leader?
I'll say a few things about Burnham. One is he's the right age. We've had a succession of political leaders, not all of them, who are too young to do the job. Tony Blair was one of them. There's no real experience. Burnham's been mayor. He's been a cabinet minister. He's well trained, and he's 56, about the right age.
Yeah.
He comes from the heart of the Labour Party, and you can see that in his appointments, like John Healey as Chancellor. He comes, and I'm sure he's intelligent enough to be aware of the scale, nature of the problem. But the problems he is facing are probably the most difficult since the war, and they've completely defeated a series of prime ministers, either whether it was Starmer or whether it was Sunak or Johnson or May. They've been unable to deal with these problems, which is a stagnating economy, mass immigration, certainly by post-war standards, and I think that and finances, which are people. I'm afraid if you look at our national debt, it's surged since 1908, so 2008, it's gone through the roof. From being about 40% of gross national product to over 100%. You've got the bond markets snarling at you, and that means that what Blair was able to do in 2001, which was to completely fund the National Health Service, that isn't an option, just simply for Burnham, and he's got to find other ways to create a vibrant economy. It's going to be very difficult, particularly outside the European Union.
But he started well in 2 weeks, and everyone actually can remember what he's done in 2 weeks. No one could remember a word that Starmer said, but somehow he seemed to remember what Burnham has done. People remember the fact about he's put a cap on £2 bus fares. 79% apparently know about the £2 bus fare. 73% know about number 10 North in Manchester. 72% about that off electricity bills. So what he's doing, even if these are small and marginal things in the first 2 weeks, has actually cut through, and people say, yeah, he's done that.
I think none of that really means
anything
beyond the fact that he is he knows how to play politics. I read all these three things doing. I think he's campaigning. I think he may well be planning an autumn election. He's behaving not as if he's governing Britain, but coming up with these gimmicks, because that's what the three things you've told me about are gimmicks. Now, is he going to do what Starmer wasn't? There's a fantastic opportunity for an incoming Prime Minister to change Britain for the better. Much, one is to deal with the menace of the United States, which is become the most dangerous power in the world by miles, constantly invading or threatening to invade other countries. Britain's foreign policy, the embedded foreign policy establishment supports all of this, and it's going to be putting pressure, but he will stand up against it, and that means doing really serious things like suspending arms sales to Israel, sanctions on the West Bank, really recognising, which Starmer was never able to do, that Israel, and saying in terms, Israel has committed war crimes. Starmer wasn't even, let alone talk about genocide. He said he couldn't say they were committing war crimes in the weight of the and that's in foreign policy.
I mean, Starmer encouraged them to commit war crimes.
Yeah. That's in foreign policy. And I think he has to, he doesn't want to get involved in these pile-ons against the hapless Pedro Sanchez. He should be coming to the support. He should be standing up for decency. International, he said. And another thing he can do.
I mean, but he's fallen at the first hurdle as far as Iran's concerned, because the first conversation he's had with Trump is to say, yes, you can use our air bases for attacking Iran, but of course, it's only defensive. Well, that, as we all know with Trump, that's meaningless.
Yeah, he exactly. That's all pretty well the first thing he had to do as well, as Trump was threatening to unleash hell.
I mean, we're going to talk about Israel and we're going to talk about Iran next, but I just want to concentrate on Burnham and the domestic side of Burnham for the moment. Yes. And basically, the question I want to know is, when do the hard decisions start?
Yes, exactly. And there is this. The economy is on the verge. Yeah, obviously, to October the 28th.
Is that the crunch point? The other interesting thing is that he's kept some Starmerites in power, but he's got a very, very curious situation going on with Healey, who is both Chancellor and some people say he keeps on being Defence Secretary. What's going on there?
This is, I think, negligent by Burnham. Maybe he wasn't brought to his attention, but Healey has indicated that he's going to have a military officer inside the Treasury when dealing.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's mad, isn't it?
Well, it contradicts sort of orthodox good government, because it means that he's saying, I'm simultaneously going to be the Defence Secretary in effect, because he's taking away the authority of Wes Streeting, the actual Defence Secretary. And of course, Healey became what he is at this late stage of an exceptionally boring political career by being a very solid defence secretary. I mean, doing what the defence establishment, the arms manufacturers and the intelligence services tell you ought to do, and applauded from the background by the CIA and the Americans. And obviously the press applauded, so that's marvellous. You're being sensible and tough, and so Healey comes into office with this embedded contradiction. He's got to sort out the national finances, but he's pledged, for that 3% on defence spending. And so if he's going to, all right, 3% on defence spending means it's absolutely swinging cuts elsewhere. Now, classically, this reminds me so much of a political crisis which occurred very early on in my career as a journalist. It was when late 1980s, and the big issue was the economy and the EU and the euro. Nigel Lawson has one set of policies. Maggie Thatcher had another. She put in an economist as her special advisor in Downing Street, Alan Walters, now to sabotage the Chancellor. Here, see, if these reports are correct, Healey has put in a military officer to sabotage the Defence Secretary. It is directly taking away any chance, Sweeting and elsewhere has to make his own points about the defence budget and others. So Healey has appointed himself both Defence Secretary and the Chancellor. This is except in wartime, when it effectively is the case. That is a novel and very dangerous situation, which is likely to end in tears.
Right. Okay. So that's one elephant trap for Burnham. Are there any others?
Well, yeah, the scale of the debt.
The scale of the debt.
I mean, it is. I return though to Harold Wilson. Okay. Harold Wilson, history gives him a better and better ride every time you look back at that time. We're starting to realise here was a man who knew how to navigate really difficult situations. The British economy was in crisis, it was stagnation, and you had America devoted to disastrous wars. At that time, Vietnam. Wilson avoided going into Vietnam, and somehow he navigated between all of these economic, political crises, such as devaluation. And I think, is Burnham as skillful politically and had the ability, while all this was going on, to be reassuring?
Yeah, definitely. Well, he's certainly got great communication skills. Fine, look, let's go a bit further afield, which is another elephant trap for Burnham, but it's related. And that is what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Gaza, and then finally to Iran.
I'm rather excited by this new plan for peace in Gaza. I mean, finally, we seem to have what reminds me very much of the Good Friday Agreement. You know, there's a plan for decommissioning weapons by Hamas. Israel is going to withdraw. There's some political solution. And of course, I remember you were in Northern Ireland at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. So how do you see the analogies?
In your dreams, Peter. The analogies with Northern Ireland. I wasn't there during the Good Friday. I was there quite a lot earlier in the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was the start of the process. And it's the one good thing I think that Thatcher did. She invited Ireland in as a partner, and just the Irish helicopters landing on Stormont created a riot, of course, amongst the Orange men. And their sharpened umbrellas, which were pointed at me at the time.
So, excuse me, they actually pointed. They got their knives out.
They sharpened the tips of umbrellas
sort of spears,
and then pointed them into British correspondents, whom they hated, of course. There's actually, I mean, if you really want to go into the parallel between the decommissioning of Hamas's weapons and the IRA's, you have Britain doing the sensible thing in Northern Ireland, and what's being and the whole process is being completely abandoned, and all the political lessons from that have been completely thrown out the window when it comes to Israel and Hamas, because Israel has to be treated exceptionally and different. And we all know it's not going to work. Now, what happened with decommission was a very, very long process, but there was a prisoner release. There was a very long decommissioning process. It was overseen by George Mitchell, overseen by the Americans, who were genuinely acting as outside negotiators, because the nationalist community, of both sides of the nationalist community, had some trust in what the Americans were doing. So there was a genuine there's no mediation role here. And of course, at the end of it, there was a political prize. And apart from which the RUC was disbanded, the paramilitary, mainly almost wholly Protestant police force was disbanded and called something completely different. And Sinn Féin and the Republicans.
I seem to remember the Good Friday not the Good Friday, the Savile inquiry emerged from it, i.e. British war crimes were to be subject to judicial...
That too, but the biggest one was power sharing. Yeah. Power sharing in Stormont. Now, look at what's being offered to Hamas. There is no decommissioning on the Israeli side. They're refusing to withdraw, and they keep on bombing. There is no political process at all. Hamas have been tried for years to join a unity government with Fatah, and Fatah have stopped them at the bidding of the West, but particularly America and Britain. They said, don't join a unity government. That's the only thing that would give Fatah some semblance of credibility amongst its electorate would be, or amongst its people, it would be if not just Hamas, but all the factions joined together to form a unity government. Now, you basically, people say, where's the leadership of the Palestinians? The leadership of the Palestinians is in jail. It's in prison. And they're being starved. And the latest, Ben Gvir's latest wheeze is surrounded with crocodiles. Now, could you imagine, the IRA or Sinn Féin negotiating surrounded by crocodiles? I mean, it's absolutely crazy what's going on. But somehow we use the same language, and we bin everything that we learnt about Northern Ireland and how it became an intensely political process, and how real sacrifices had to be made on both sides, on both the Unionist and the Republican side. When I was in Northern Ireland, and I would go up to a Republican and say, do you want to share power in Stormont? They say, what? I'm not going to join a partitionist assembly, because it would solidify the partition of Ireland from a Republican point of view. That's exactly what they ended up doing, because Northern Ireland is still Northern Ireland. It's not, the 6 counties is not part of the Irish Republic. So they made their sacrifices, and the Unionists did as well, particularly the Protestant paramilitary organisations. They decommissioned. Now, we all knew at the time that each part of each community would split, and so there have been there's the real IRA still going, and there was an attempt which was intercepted quite recently to import a very big bomb into it. So bombing campaign still goes on, but it's all much quieter now. It took many decades for the walls to start coming down between the various communities, but that was the path to peace, and it was an intensely political path to the peace. And everything else before that had been tried. Swimming pools in West Belfast, the SAS in slippers, going all over the West Belfast, shooting IRA or potentially IRA units. It was a very dirty war. The killing of Finucane, the lawyer. Everything was tried. In the end, Britain decided, with America's bidding, to go down a very, very political route. Now, none of that is happening with Hamas, and you had this sort of historic agreement being signed, and yet the ink is not dry on the agreement before it is being redrafted by the very people who signed it. So you've had now statements. So formally what Hamas signed to was for storing the weapons, not in the hands of Israel, but in the hands of this new Palestinian Authority that would govern Gaza. So they would give their weapons to Palestinians. They wouldn't give their weapons to Israelis or Americans.
That's in the agreement at the moment, isn't
yes,
it? There's some sort of national Palestinian Authority is named.
Yeah, and no, not a national Palestinian Authority, a very odd body just of technocrats governing Gaza, but they've yet to even enter Gaza at the moment. This is another body. This is not the PA involved. But so what Hamas formally agreed to was making an inventory of their heavy weapons and storing them. Right now, all of these conditions are being overturned. There was a statement by the Board of Peace saying that, by the way, it's got to include all weapons, including light, personal, family weapons. Disarmament has to be destruction, not containment or storage, not in the original agreement. This is within, a couple of days of signing this agreement, and conditioning removal and destruction of all weapons before withdrawal. They've completely changed the terms. This is the border peace has changed the document that it spent months negotiating.
This is a scandal, isn't it?
Well, this is now passes as sort of normal.
There's been renewed bombing as well,
and there's renewed bombing,
mass death actually,
and then so that's the border peace, and now you've got Mladenov, who's the foreign representative, the Bulgarian diplomat, and he's now saying withdrawal must move in lockstep with decommissioning. Withdrawal must proceed in tandem, step by step, with the process of decommissioning the weapons. None of this is in the agreement, So you don't have Israel involved in making the agreement. You have Trump saying this is peace in our time. And then, just as he did with Iran, when the details are questioned, what does this mean? We're not a party to it. We won't do this. We won't withdraw. We'll only withdraw back to the yellow line. They then suddenly retreat. So there's no sense of a George Mitchell coming in and saying, no, you're not going to do this. I'm the guy with the decommissioning, and I say these are the rules, and I'm going to keep to them because they were done in my name. America has stopped being a negotiator in that sense, and nothing it says is reliable.
Actually, the Egyptians are the negotiator, aren't they?
Well, they passed the messages through to Hamas, and it was done in Cairo, but. In the same way that we have Pakistan passing the messages between Iran and the United States. But there's no sense, and this is the point I really want to make, the complete absence of an independent, neutral negotiator who bangs the heads of both sides together. And we're just allowing Israel to set the parameters of what they will allow and what they will not allow. Now, why did Hamas sign this? I think they knew that this would happen and that they're playing for time.
Well, actually, Hamas doesn't emerge badly from this, does it? It entered in good faith, one would assume, into this agreement, which is promptly, according to your account, being smashed to bits by the Americans and the Israelis.
But you can also criticize Hamas for giving away too much too soon, because what happens in all of these negotiations is that Israel and America bank the gains, i.e. Hamas saying it will disarm, and then keep on renegotiating it. And they get and bit by bit. This is the same thing happened with the return of the hostages. Hamas returned the hostages in return for an end to war, and it hasn't happened. Thousands have died since then. And Israel continues to carry on. In fact, Israel's response to this latest breakthrough was to bomb Gaza and keep on bombing Gaza. And they were reprimanded by Mladenov. So you have this sort of totally unreliable process of negotiation, which is just a pause before another onslaught. And I question whether Hamas was wise to sign this agreement, because it just banks the idea that it is prepared to decommission a long time before there's any political settlement or even path to a Palestinian state has opened up. There's no path to a Palestinian state, and every figure, both past, present and future in Israel, has said we will now not accept a Palestinian state. That has now become the complete orthodoxy of Israeli public opinion. There's no major figure now on the left or the right that says I'm prepared to negotiate.
And Eisenkot, who's the favourite to win the next elections.
Gabi Eisenkot at the moment is favourite, but he's not doing it because he's suddenly become soft on the Palestinians. Far from it. He was the author of the Dahia doctrine, which is the precursor basically to Gaza, which is the doctrine of disproportionate force against civilian areas, killing as many civilians as possible to terrify the civilian population in an insurgency.
Yeah, that was tried out first in 2006, wasn't it? In the South Lebanon, and then applied in Gaza and elsewhere. Yeah. You can't really understand Gaza without knowing that happened in 2006. It became a doctrine. It became standard operating procedure.
Yeah, so I think there's much less to this agreement than meets the eye, but Hamas thinks they're buying time, and that they could be introducing. They could use it as a lever to split Trump and Israel. I'm not sure that thinking will entirely work in its favour. But at the moment, I don't see this agreement sticking any longer than the Iran MAU agreement stuck, which was for 3 weeks.
And also, of course, Gaza has very much gone off the map. I mean, so much else going on in Iran, and of course the West Bank.
But the conditions inside Gaza are horrific. Yeah. We've now got a heat wave inside Gaza. Yeah. They're intense. It hasn't become worse. It is one horror after another. When you say Gaza's gone off, it means that we can't keep concentrating on Gaza.
That's what I meant. But politically and in media terms, it's just not. It's rather been forgotten about, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's receded. Yeah. I think the dangerous thing about Gaza is that Gaza has normalized genocide. We're accepting the idea of Gaza being there under these horrendous conditions with the death rate carrying on, and it just surviving on a bare minimum of rations as the new norm. And this is a huge stain on our. We can live in London perfectly happily in the heat wave, in the drought, and forget what's happening with Gaza,
like
where there's no water, where
sanitation,
where there's no sanitation, where medical services are absolutely at a minimum now, and on a life support system. That's the new, and everyone's in tents, and they're being bombed. I mean, I saw recently a picture, which we didn't publish, but it's in my WhatsApp, of the little girls who are shredded in their tent. And that is now life in Gaza. Girls getting shredded, literally shredded by Israeli bombs. And that's no one counts that. No one publishes these pictures. No one actually makes. There are no stories about these little girls and who they were and their mother. And there are no pictures.
And there are no pictures. You presumably, Middle East Eye chose not to publish them on the grounds that they were too horrifying.
Yes, but I think we should be horrified. I think we should publish these pictures, actually. No?
Well, you are the editor-in-chief, Mr. Hearst. It's up to you.
But I'm horrified by the
Look, I completely understand. There are all kinds of
the mismatch
pictures
between Brits complaining about a hot summer and what Gaza is suffering day in, day out. And now you tell me no one's thinking about Gaza anymore.
No, I mean the issue of pictures from Gaza has been there from the start. The sheer horror of mangled bodies and children with brains.
But it doesn't just happen. This is not a bolt from Zeus. This is planned. It's thought about. It is deeply engineered. It is not just that Burnham should recognise previous war crimes, but stop the war crimes that are happening right now.
It is worth saying,
before our eyes.
Returning to the subject of Burnham, the only error he's acknowledged is the failure of the Labour Party, Labour opposition to support a ceasefire in November 2023, when he, as Mayor of Manchester, did support it, and I was very pleased that he appointed Andy Slaughter, Solicitor General, who along with a number of other Labour MPs, where Andy Slaughter was the Shadow Solicitor General and appeared to give away his whole entire future career by voting for a ceasefire in November. And so at least he's now come back into the government. What Andy Burnham hasn't done is acknowledge all the other things which Starmer was responsible for as Labour leader since.
He didn't support Karim Khan, the British chief prosecutor of the ICC. There was no discernible change of policy as far as the ICC was concerned. You have Britain, that is a member state, a founding member state of the ICC and the Rome Statute, and
he did, to his fairness, Starmer, withdraw Britain's support for a delaying process at the ICC.
Yes,
I think we should always.
But he didn't support Karim Khan, and nor did Andy Burnham.
No.
Now what you've got, and the reason why Karim Khan was targeted was because of the warrants to Netanyahu and the former defense minister Yoav Gallant. And those warrants were the most effective response, the only effective response that the Western world has made to the genocide. Nothing else matters.
Well, I think also the International Court of Justice
yeah, but that's going nowhere as well. I mean, that's just simply being kicked into the long grass.
Is that right?
This is totally. I mean, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say this, but Netanyahu's won in both courts, and so in a sense, you've got Burnham saying we must, and Andy Slaughter, whatever, we must do the right things about Israel, but there's so much. Even if they just said, the two of them, we will abide by international law, that would be a huge.
Well, it's been a statement from Ed Miliband to that effect as the incoming Foreign Secretary that Britain would do just that, abide by international law.
Okay, yeah, and so is he going to? There's an active warrant out for Netanyahu's arrest. Is Ed Miliband going to arrest Netanyahu?
Well, I mean,
of course he's not going to do that. So I mean, and there's no pressure for him to do that. So what does that mean?
Can I just follow up? I hadn't got that impression that the ICJ was basically kicked to the long grass. I got the impression that when I asked senior people close to it that it's just taking an awfully long time. And they said, look, the Myanmar case also took a long time. You shouldn't read too much into the fact it's being slow.
Well, there's a very big difference between the two, and that is that they've already come to an interim judgment, and they said they bound Israel to stop military operations because they were in danger of being genocidal.
True. That was very early on. That was in the spring.
How long ago was that?
2024, spring of, yeah.
Spring of. And we are now in?
Exactly, 2026, yes.
More
than 2 years
2
later,
years ago, how many people have died in that
and
time?
Israel have never paid the faintest attention to those.
So how long should we wait for the ICJ to even say that actually Israel hasn't even has just turned its nose up at what we told them to do over 2 years ago? That's the difference with Myanmar. So it really is important for all of us. This isn't a partisan point on behalf of one group of people called the Palestinians. This is about international justice. We all will need it, and we are tearing it up. So it's just not good enough to say I believe in international justice. You've actually got to say you've got to act on it, and acting on it means an awful lot as far as Britain is concerned. Now, I think what you will see with Burnham is possibly some action on settlers and settlers' produce. That's very easy, low-hanging fruit to take. I mean, anything that isolates what the settlers are doing, what Israel is doing commercially, is I wouldn't turn my nose up at. I wouldn't say it's nothing, because it is pressure. But I don't think we're going to see remotely Britain saying we should apply international law and actually acting on it.
The other case which we haven't mentioned yet, of course, is the ICJ ruling in July 2024 that Israel should get out of the West occupied territories.
And it's doing the opposite. It is actually annexing the West Bank.
And
as
that very
brutally.
long document, Britain is obligated as a signatory to actually respond. And 2 years have now passed with no response to that.
There are 1,000 gates around. There was a time when Blair was talking about hundreds of gates. There's 1,000 gates are now around every Palestinian village and every Palestinian town in the West Bank. And they're being locked at whim, the whim of Israeli soldiers. Ambulances can't get through, children can't get through, crops can't get through. And that is how they deal with everyone. This is no longer about Hamas. This is about every single Palestinian trying to live on occupation. And never before has the occupation been as brutally applied as it is today. And Israel's just getting away with it. There's no pressure on Israel to change this. It's just part of the furniture. Finally, Peter, on Iran, we're back into this cycle of Trump saying that negotiations for a deal are imminent, but Iran saying there are no negotiations. And that the only really verifiable talks are between Iran and Oman, which Tehran admits to. It's now been 5 months. We're in the 5th cycle of threatened escalation, followed by last-minute cancellations. And the 14-point, the last deal, which was the 14-point MOU of the 17th of June, collapsed within 3 weeks of drafting. Where do you think we are with Iran, and who do you think is winning?
It looks like Iran has won, and the Americans know it. And so that's why Trump veers between these apocalyptic threats to Iran, that he's going to, bomb them in a way that's never been bombed before, and then these rather needy announcements that he's in talks with Tehran. He's clearly stuck between an appeal to his domestic audience who don't want the war, and the real danger that this will get out of control, globalize, and lead to all kinds of awful consequences, including global economic collapse. And at the same time, I think he feels, this is purely my judgment, he obviously feels some form of loyalty towards Israel. He's under enormous pressure, it would appear, from Netanyahu to carry on the war. What can get us out of this? I think the markets might, if they suddenly freak. And the other one is that the midterm elections are not now that distant. So I don't know if Trump is caring about that. There's always the theory as well that if the war with Iran intensifies, that he gives the excuse both for Netanyahu to call off the Israeli elections and Trump to call off the midterms. They have domestic incentives to the war. In that sense, it reminds me of the outbreak of World War I. It was basically the Kaiser had run out of options domestically, and the solution to his international.
I mean, that would cause a furore both in Israel and in America for totally different reasons, yes. That they were actually acting illegally. This war is very, very unpopular in America, and I think he'd have a real a domestic crisis on his hands if he actually postponed the election for that reason. He's already said that he could run for a third term, or hinted at that. Certainly, Steve Bannon hinted at that as well. That there was some, but there would be a real constitutional crisis in America if he postponed the elections. But less than that, do you think that Trump has actually learned any lessons from this? Because certainly his vice president, J.D. Vance, has. He was against the strikes in February in the first place. And he recently told a huge blogger in America that you can't open the Strait of Hormuz by force.
Yeah.
But Trump still thinks he can. Yeah. Trump is always on the verge of saying, well, if you don't agree, we're just about to crush you as never before.
I don't think Trump's learnt anything. And to bring this back to Britain, and indeed to Europe, I think we should call time on this and our support for it. It's just there should be a strong Burnham. You get as an incoming prime minister, you have about 6 months to reset the agenda. And I think if he was to make a speech saying that we're now withdrawing consent for the use of our bases in any form, that this war is, but to do it in a statesman-like way, this war is incredibly damaging. It's an illegal war under international law. We're speaking on behalf not just of Britain but of the world, and in particular our Gulf allies who are constantly being bombed, attacked. And I think this would be an opportunity for Burnham to make a stance on the world stage. I think he would then find it would be real leadership, and I think other leaders would join him in this.
But you know what Trump would do? Trump would slap tariffs on Britain.
Yes, of course. He's got something he's got to live with. He can't be bullied all the time.
And if you were Prime Minister, you'd do that.
I'm not saying I'd do that, but I see what you mean. You're quite right. There are enormous pressures. And not just tariffs. You get other kinds of threats. You've got to look at what's been happening to Sanchez and co. Yeah. And then in Ireland as well. Yeah. I think, though, that Trump is a very stupid wild dog, yeah? He's a rabid dog. And
I don't think of him as an animal. I think of him as Don Corleone. I think of him as a mafia boss who requires respect and requires people to touch the forelock. And he's basically in charge. And he can give gifts or he can order assassinations at will. But Don Corleone requires respect and he requires money and tribute. And I think that's the mentality of Trump.
It is the mentality. Actually, it's maybe a better analogy with one exception. Don Corleone in The Godfather was a brilliant assessor of risk and danger. And Trump isn't. He's a kid. Yeah. And he's dangerous.
He's a sport brat, yeah.
Yeah, and he's like
he's a brat with nuclear weapons.
Yes, yeah. And so I agree with you. I'm withdrawing my analogy, in fact, to a wild dog. I accept he's a sort of a gangster's brat. And of course, he's run by the mob. It looks like it, doesn't it? All that sort of. But
just one final point. Yeah. I mean, it brings us back to the start of the conversation, which was Ceuta, and that is the way in which Trump's values have been absorbed by very different institutions and very different leaders. Europe's gone through its gangsterist phase. Italy went through its gangsterism phase when it was liberated by people like my father and the British Army. And that was when the mafia really came into its own with America. And it's gone through all of these phases, and yet it's adopting this sort of international agreements don't matter because we can tear them up.
Exactly.
And I think that's the most dangerous part of the Trump. Trump's very colourful for us journalists because he provides a story every day, but there's something very unfunny and very sinister going on, and that's the absorption of values where an international agreement has roughly the same value as a roll of toilet paper.
It's still amazing to remember this moment, actually, when in 1981, when Israel hit a nuclear plant in Iraq, Bushehr, I think it was, and she was absolutely condemned this, and I dug out an interview with a Jewish Chronicle journalist, Monty Modlin. And he said, "You're betraying Israel." She pointed her famous finger and said, "We only have international law. Without that, we have nothing." And what the current generation of leaders, who, of course, are brought up after World War II and have forgotten the consequence, why we brought into being the ICJ, the United Nations, all these great institutions to to police the world and avoid these kind of crises. Now we kids now are running the world like Trump, and I'm afraid that, I'd like to think that Britain, which created the post-war world in many ways, the international legal order, would start to stand up for it in a way we didn't under Starmer. This is an opportunity for Burnham.
It sure is, but the shopping, the bucket list of things he's got to do,
I know,
is just huge.
And we both wish him well. I mean, Britain really needs somebody who succeeds as Prime Minister.
But he also, that Britain needs a leader with guts. And whether Andy Burnham's that guy, jury's out as far as I'm concerned. But it sure does need someone who could be at the real Andy Burnham.
And I think one of these things that Ceuta shows us is that we need a group of leaders, including Britain in Europe, who will stand together against these menaces rather than fragment. Yeah,
absolutely. Peter, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and see you soon.
Thank you very much. A great pleasure. Fascinating.